Welcome to Grave Tongue. Before you drift off, like and subscribe for more late night chills. Comment the time you're watching and where you're from below. Now, let's begin. I still remember the way the hallway smelled, antiseptic with a hint of something rotting beneath. I was assigned to do rounds in the old Ward C, a section they said was technically closed for renovation, but that they still used in overflow. My steps echoed as I pushed the squeaking medicine cart along, lights flickering overhead like dying stars. The air was cold, biting at my exposed wrists, and every time I glanced at the shadowy corners, I felt watched. There was only one patient listed for this ward, room 304. I checked my clipboard, no diagnosis, no allergies, just a name written in smudged ink I couldn't quite decipher. When I entered, I saw a frail figure on the bed, breathing in harsh, wet gasps, staring right through me with milk-white eyes. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady as I asked if they needed anything, but they didn't answer, just that awful rattling breath, growing louder until it seemed to fill the whole room. I reached out, my gloved fingers trembling, but the bed was empty before I could touch them, just the sheets cold and flat. I spun, heart hammering, and heard the same ragged breathing right behind me. Turning slowly, I saw the patient standing, pale feet leaving bloody footprints on the tile, mouth wide open in a soundless scream. I ran, the corridor stretching impossibly long, lights dying one by one behind me. I could hear them following, dragging feet, gasping, that wet choking. I didn't stop until I burst through the doors into the main hall, where everyone turned to stare at me like I was insane. When I looked back, the door to Ward C was closed, the sign taped over with black plastic that read, "Do not enter." I still hear them sometimes in my sleep, their breathing rattling in my ear, like they're waiting for me to come back. They told me to clean the old operating theater, the one in the hospital basement no one used anymore except for storage. I could barely see as I flipped the switch, revealing rusted surgical tools scattered across metal trays. The air was heavy with mold and old blood, the walls lined with cracked tiles that wept brownish streaks. I tried not to gag as I swept, my mop sloshing through something dark that refused to come up. Then I heard it, a faint metallic clatter. I froze, turning slowly to see one of the scalpels rolling off a tray on its own, hitting the floor with a sharp, clear ring. I tried to laugh it off, but I noticed the old operating table had fresh straps. New, clean leather that hadn't been there when I entered. I bent to pick up the scalpel and heard a voice behind me, calm, almost amused. "Scalpel." I whipped around, heart thundering in my chest, but no one was there. The voice repeated itself, closer this time, right at my ear. "Scalpel." The tools on the tray began rattling, dancing, some clattering to the floor as though eager to be picked up. The old surgical lamp above me flickered wildly, buzzing like a nest of wasps. I backed away, tripped over the mop bucket, fell hard, the liquid soaking my scrubs. I tried to crawl to the door, but the operating table's straps uncoiled like snakes, whipping across the floor toward me. I don't remember leaving. I just remember waking up in the break room, shivering, my uniform soaked in something red I tried to tell myself was mop water. No one believes me when I say the operating theater has been calling for an assistant ever since. My shift in the hospital morgue was quiet most nights, too quiet. The air was always icy, the overhead lights dimmed to save power, leaving strange shadows in every corner. I was logging bodies into the freezer drawers when I noticed one marked unidentified male, slightly ajar, the light inside blinking. I cursed under my breath, pushing it shut, but it resisted, almost as if something was blocking it. My gloved hand trembled as I pulled it back open to check. The body was there, naked and pale, eyes wide open even though they should have been sewn shut. I jumped back, knocking over the clipboard, heart hammering in the silence that followed. I reached to close his eyes gently, anything to end that awful stare, but the eyelids fluttered beneath my fingers. He exhaled. A thin, cold breath spilled from his mouth onto my wrist. I felt the chill run up my arm like ice water in my veins. Then his lips moved, dry, cracking, whispering something that made no sense. I leaned closer, compelled, nauseated by the smell of decay. I heard it then. "Let me out." I tried to step away, but the drawer jerked as if he were pushing against it from inside. I slammed it shut, locked it, but the metal rattled violently behind me. I fled up the stairs, the echo of his words following me through the empty hallways. I don't work in the morgue anymore, but sometimes, when I pass by in the basement, I hear the drawers rattle and that same desperate voice pleading over and over to be released. They told me the old psychiatric wing was off limits, but I had to see it for myself. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing peeling paint and broken wheelchairs overturned in the hall. The smell was sour, like stale sweat and mold. Every step crunched glass and debris underfoot. I found the old nurse's station, papers scattered everywhere, records of patients with scribbled notes about restraints, screaming, and worse. I thought I heard weeping from one of the rooms, but when I approached, the sound stopped. My breath misted in the cold air, even though it was warm outside. I should have left then, but curiosity pushed me deeper. The rooms were small cells with iron-barred windows and deep gouges in the doors where nails had scratched again and again. I entered one of the cells, the door creaking as it swung behind me. I felt something brush my arm. Nothing was there. The weeping resumed, closer now, rising into a horrible wail. The door slammed shut. I lunged for it, but it wouldn't budge. I heard whispering all around me, words I couldn't make out except for one that repeated like a chant. "Stay." My flashlight flickered out, plunging me into suffocating darkness. I screamed, pounding on the door until it finally gave way. When I burst into the hall, the lights were on, bright, sterile, new. Nurses and doctors stared at me as if I were a madman. My clothes torn, blood under my nails that wasn't mine. I never found that wing again. It was gone, boarded up, sealed like it never existed. But I still hear them sometimes, whispering for me to come back. I was on the night shift in the ICU, tasked with monitoring the patient in the isolation room. He'd coded earlier but had been resuscitated, though he hadn't woken since. I hated going in there alone. The airlock doors sealing with a hiss, the smell of antiseptic so strong it burned my nose. His eyes were open but glassy, staring at the ceiling, his chest rising and falling with the ventilator's mechanical wheeze. I felt uneasy as I checked his vitals. Skin clammy, cold, almost waxy. I turned to leave when the monitor beeped erratically. I spun around, saw his hand twitch. I froze, watching as he slowly raised his arm, fingers curling toward me in a beckoning motion. I took a step back, heart in my throat, and his mouth stretched into a grin far too wide. He whispered something, impossible over the ventilator's tubes, but I heard it clear as day in my head. "Stay with me." I backed into the door, slamming the release button over and over, but the lock refused to disengage. The room grew colder, my breath forming clouds in the sterile glow. The lights flickered, buzzing like angry insects. I heard something skittering in the vents overhead, something that scraped and clawed. The patient's grin cracked his face, blood oozing from the corners of his mouth. Finally, the door hissed open. I stumbled into the hall, gasping, as alarms screamed from the ICU. When the team ran in, they found him dead, monitor flatlined. No one believes me when I say I still hear that voice at the end of every shift, soft, patient, asking me to stay forever. I volunteered for extra hours in pediatrics, thinking the bright murals and pastel colors would feel less oppressive than the rest of the hospital. I was wrong. Late at night, the halls were eerily silent except for the occasional squeak of a wheeled toy that moved on its own when no child was awake to play with it. I was restocking supplies in the medication room when I noticed something odd on the security monitor. A dark shape standing at the end of the hallway, just outside room 12. I squinted at the screen, convinced it was a glitch, but the shadow shifted slightly, as if it were breathing. My skin crawled as I watched it slowly glide forward, stretching across the linoleum like spilled ink. I blinked and it vanished. I tried to convince myself it was just fatigue, but when I stepped back into the corridor, the air felt thicker, like the pressure before a storm. I passed room 12, trying not to look inside, but curiosity got the better of me. The door was ajar, creaking as I nudged it open. The small bed was empty, sheets crumpled as if someone had just climbed out. Then I felt it, a sudden, icy draft swirling around my ankles. The toys on the shelf began to rattle, a stuffed bear toppling to the floor with a dull thump. I backed away, heart hammering. Just before I turned to flee, I caught sight of a long, spindly arm reaching up from behind the bed, dark as soot, impossibly thin, ending in fingers that scraped the tile. I slammed the door and ran. To this day, that room remains empty, but sometimes I see the same shape on the monitors, patiently watching, waiting for someone foolish enough to step inside again. The geriatric wing was never quiet, even at night. Residents called out, alarms beeped, and sometimes someone cried in the dark. But that night, the crying was replaced by laughter, soft at first, then building into a chorus of shrill, unhinged giggling that echoed down the corridor. I was alone at the nurse's station, frozen, listening as the laughter grew closer. The overhead lights flickered, casting long shadows that moved in ways they shouldn't have. My radio crackled with static, then a voice I didn't recognize whispered my name in a sing-song tone. I knew I should have called security, but something compelled me to stand and walk toward the noise, past the rooms where elderly patients lay motionless. The laughter abruptly stopped when I reached room 217. I pushed the door open and nearly screamed. Every patient in the room, 4 frail women, was sitting bolt upright, eyes wide and mouths split in identical grins. Their skin looked waxy, almost translucent in the buzzing fluorescent light. One of them tilted her head at an impossible angle and let out a long, rattling laugh that made my stomach twist. The others joined in, the sound rising like a siren. I stumbled backward, but the door slammed shut behind me. They all turned to look at me in unison, laughter dying into a silence so profound it felt alive. I don't remember how I got out. When the morning shift arrived, the women were asleep in their beds as if nothing had happened. But now, whenever I pass that room, I hear faint giggles leaking under the door, waiting for me to listen again. I was finishing my shift in the emergency department when I noticed an empty stretcher rolling slowly down the hallway. At first, I thought someone was pushing it, but as it neared the intersection, I saw clearly. There were no hands on the rails. It moved with the same purposeful glide as if guided by an invisible attendant. The wheels squeaked rhythmically, the sound echoing off the tiled walls, and something about it, so steady, so deliberate, made my hair stand on end. I told myself it was a prank or a mechanical glitch, but when I approached, I felt a sudden chill spread through my chest. The stretcher stopped, as though waiting for me to climb on. I backed away, heart pounding, but the thing lunged forward, colliding with my hip hard enough to knock me into the wall. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted toward the nurse's station, but the stretcher followed, rolling faster and faster, wheels shrieking now like a screaming child. I ducked into an empty exam room, slamming the door shut. The metal frame shuddered violently as it rammed the door again and again. I clapped my hands over my ears, too terrified to scream, and finally, it stopped. I waited what felt like an hour before peeking into the hall. The stretcher was gone. No one believed me when I said it had chased me, just an equipment malfunction, they said. But I've seen it since, rolling slowly along the corridors at night, stopping wherever I happen to be. And every time I feel a little colder, a little closer to climbing onto it myself. As a resident psychiatrist, I was accustomed to late nights in the observation room, watching patients through the one-way mirror, making notes, trying to understand the darkness in their minds. But that night, something was different. I was alone in the dim observation booth, the red recording light blinking steadily, when I noticed the figure standing behind the patient, a tall silhouette almost blending with the shadows. My heart stuttered as I leaned closer to the glass. The patient, an elderly man with dementia, sat unmoving, but his lips parted, and he whispered, "He's here." I swallowed, unsure whether he was hallucinating, until the figure lifted one long finger to point directly at me through the mirror. My skin went cold. I glanced over my shoulder, but the observation booth was empty. When I looked back, the figure had moved closer to the glass. The patient began to convulse, eyes rolling back, a thin scream escaping his throat as the shape loomed over him. I hammered on the intercom, yelling for help, but the microphone only hissed with static. The figure turned its head slowly, its faceless darkness somehow staring straight at me. Then it pressed a hand flat against the mirror, and to my horror, the glass began to warp inward, stretching toward me like a bubble. I stumbled away as the mirror bulged further, a black hand almost breaching the surface. At last, the door burst open behind me, and the mirror snapped back to normal. They found me on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. The recording had only captured my own panicked voice. No figure, no distortion. But even now, I avoid that room. When I pass it, I swear I see my own reflection blink out for just a moment, replaced by something dark waiting to come through. It was just supposed to be a simple task: retrieve old patient files from the basement archive. The elevator creaked as it descended, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. When the doors opened, I stepped into a cavernous room lined with metal shelves, thousands of folders stacked like forgotten memories. The air was stale, heavy with dust and something older, like mildew mixed with dried blood. I started down the main aisle, my footsteps muffled on the cracked linoleum. I found the section I needed, case 472. But as I reached for the file, a folder several shelves down fell to the floor with a soft slap. I glanced around. No draft. No sign of movement. My throat tightened as I picked it up and opened it. The file was empty except for a Polaroid photo. A blurred image of someone standing alone in this very archive, hand pressed to the lens as if pleading for help. I dropped the photo, heart racing, and heard a whisper behind me. So faint I almost thought I imagined it. "Don't look away." I turned, expecting to see a coworker, but there was only the darkness between the shelves. The whisper came again, closer. "Don't look away." I backed slowly toward the elevator, but something moved in the corner of my vision. A tall, indistinct shape gliding along the aisle. My hand slapped the call button repeatedly. The lights flickered, and when they came back on, the shape was inches from me, no face, just a void where a person should be. The elevator dinged, doors sliding open, and I hurled myself inside. As they closed, I saw the shape lift a hand in a slow wave. I haven't been to the basement since, but sometimes when I close my eyes, I see the Polaroid on the floor. Someone else standing exactly where I had, caught forever in that final moment before the darkness reached them. I was covering the night shift in the ICU, a skeleton crew keeping watch over the sickest patients. The monitors beeped in dull rhythm, the smell of antiseptic thick in the air. Around 3 a.m., I noticed something strange on the census. Room 409 was marked occupied, but I hadn't admitted anyone there. Curious and a little uneasy, I walked down the hall. The fluorescent lights hummed and flickered overhead as I reached the door. I knocked softly, hesitated, then pushed it open. The room was cold, unusually so. A shape lay on the bed beneath the thin blanket, unmoving. I stepped closer and felt my mouth go dry. The figure was horribly thin, skin grayish and stretched tight over sharp bones. Its eyes were open but glazed, staring right at me without blinking. I reached for the call button, but before I could press it, the figure shuddered and sat up slowly, too slowly, like a puppet with tangled strings. It turned its head toward me with a creaking sound that made my skin crawl. I stumbled back into the hallway, heart racing, and called for help. When 2 nurses arrived moments later, the room was empty. The bed was made untouched. No trace of anyone there. They looked at me like I'd lost my mind. But later that night, when I tried to sleep in the break room, I heard soft wheezing breathing behind me. I turned over, but the room was empty, except for the cold chill pressing against my spine. I stopped working nights after that. Still, I sometimes check the census board, and every so often, room 409 is marked occupied, with no patient name listed. I was on maintenance duty that month, checking air vents in the old psychiatric wing. Long abandoned, paint peeling in strips like shedding skin. The air was stale, heavy with mildew, and the walls were tagged with graffiti left by trespassing kids. I hated going in alone, but orders were orders. I was removing a vent cover when I heard it, a muffled scream echoing through the ductwork. I froze, wrench in hand, listening as the scream faded into ragged sobbing. My mouth went dry. I tried to convince myself it was wind or an animal, but I knew the difference. Carefully, I leaned forward, ear inches from the dark vent. The crying stopped suddenly, replaced by a hoarse whisper. "Help me?" It sounded so close, like it was inside the wall. My heart hammered as I stumbled back, dropping the wrench with a clatter. The whisper became frantic, repeating over and over, "Help me! Help me! Help me!" Louder each time, building to a piercing, inhuman shriek that rattled the metal cover. I ran, boots slamming the cracked tile, the scream following me through the corridors like a gust of wind. When I burst outside into the cold night air, it cut off instantly, replaced by silence so complete it rang in my ears. I reported what happened, but they just closed the wing permanently, bricking over the doors. Even so, some nights when the wind is still, I swear I hear it. Someone screaming behind those walls, begging to get out, or worse, trying to lure someone else in. As an intern, I dreaded being assigned to the morgue. The smell of formaldehyde clung to your clothes, and the cold seemed to seep into your bones. That night, I had to sign off on a body transfer. A John Doe from an accident, no ID. I remember how he looked. Pale, blood-caked hair, eyes half-lidded but open. I pushed the drawer shut with a shudder, scribbled my signature, and turned to leave. But behind me, the metal tray slid open again with a shriek. I whipped around. The corpse hadn't moved except for one thing. Its eyes were now fully open, staring straight at me with an intensity that made me gasp. I told myself it was rigor mortis, that bodies do weird things. Still, I forced the drawer closed again, using all my weight. I didn't even make it to the door before it slammed open once more, the tray rolling out violently this time. The body jerked as if in seizure, mouth opening in a silent scream. The lights overhead flickered, buzzing like angry insects. I backed away slowly, but the body twitched again, fingers scraping the metal tray with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. Then it stopped moving all at once, completely limp. The lights steadied. I ran, slamming the morgue door behind me, my breathing ragged. No one believed me, of course. They found the body neatly stored when they checked. But sometimes, even now, I hear the metallic scrape of the drawer opening by itself, and I know he's waiting for someone to come back and see his eyes. I was working nights in a small rural hospital, the kind where you're often alone in the hallways, where every creak feels amplified. Around 2 a.m., the call light for room 8 lit up. Odd, because that room was unoccupied, being repainted after a flood. I hesitated, then picked up the phone connected to the room's intercom. Static hissed in my ear before going dead. The light continued to glow steadily. With dread pooling in my stomach, I grabbed my flashlight and walked down the hall. The door to room 8 was closed, but the light over it burned bright red. Pushed it open. The smell of fresh paint mingled with something else. Old coppery, like blood left to rot. My light swept over the empty bed, the plastic-covered floors, but there was no one there. Then the call button on the wall clicked audibly. I turned and watched it depress itself. Slowly, deliberately. The red light went out, then immediately came back on. I heard breathing in the dark. Not mine. Heavy, raspy, as if something were waiting in the corner just beyond my light's reach. I called out, voice shaking, but got no answer. The breathing grew louder, closer, until I felt hot air brush my ear. I ran. The call button stayed lit the rest of my shift. Maintenance claimed it was faulty wiring. They replaced it twice, but the same thing happens every few weeks. Sometimes the new nurses dare each other to sit alone in there with the light on. I did it once, never again, because when the button clicks, something is in there with you wanting you to answer. During my pathology rotation, I spent long hours alone in the autopsy suite. The stainless steel tables gleamed under harsh lights, the air thick with the sour sting of formalin. One night, I was finishing notes on a suicide case. Young woman, wrists slashed deep. I glanced at her body on the table, sewn neatly after the exam, pale limbs stiff. As I turned away to file paperwork, I heard a soft thump. I froze, breath catching. Another thump, louder. I looked back and saw one arm had fallen off the table, dangling grotesquely. Heart hammering, I approached to reposition it, whispering apologies to no one. As my fingers touched the cold flesh, the arm twitched violently, fingers curling around my wrist with bruising force. I screamed, yanking myself free, stumbling backward into a tray of instruments that clattered to the floor. The body convulsed once, then fell still, the hands sliding limply away. The lights overhead buzzed, casting deep shadows that seemed to pool beneath the table. I gathered the courage to check for any movement. Nothing. The body lay exactly as before. My wrist burned with red fingerprints that didn't fade for days. I finished my notes with shaking hands and never stayed past sundown again. The attending said it was just post-mortem reflex, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. I still dream about that cold, bruising grip. Sometimes, I wake up convinced there's a dead hand wrapped around my wrist, fingers tightening slowly, insistently, as if begging me to join it on the table. I'd been working nights in the surgical wing, where everything felt sharper. Scalpels, smells, even the quiet. It was after 2 a.m. when I noticed it. A dark stain spreading slowly across the tile outside operating room 3. I frowned, crouched, touched it with gloved fingers. Blood still warm. My heart sank. No surgeries were scheduled, no patients inside. I stood, glancing through the small observation window. The room was dark except for the dim glow of the overhead lamp, which swung gently as if recently disturbed. My breath fogged the glass. That's when I saw it. Something on the table under the sheet, rising and falling with wet, ragged breaths. I knew that room was empty. My chest tightened, but I had to check. I unlocked the door and pushed it open slowly. The smell hit me first. Iron and decay, thick enough to make me gag. The sheet on the table was soaked in fresh blood. As I approached, it twitched violently, falling away to reveal deep, ragged gashes as if someone had been half dissected alive. The thing on the table turned its head toward me, jaw hanging askew, eyes wide with agony. It rasped out a wet, bubbling noise I realized was my name. I bolted, slipping in the blood pooling around my shoes, slamming the door behind me so hard the window cracked. Security found nothing inside except a spotless table and gleaming tools. The stain in the hall was gone. But now, whenever I pass that door, I hear my name in that same wet voice, begging me to finish what someone else started. I was setting up in 4-line for a patient in an empty ward they'd reopened temporarily during a flu surge. The room was bare and cold, paint peeling around the windows. I was alone with the patient, an elderly man unconscious, respirator hissing in the silence. As I spiked the 4 bag, I heard it. A soft whisper, words too quick to catch, coming from behind me. I froze, needle in hand. The respirator hissed in rhythm, but the whisper grew clearer. "He's not alone," it said. My skin crawled as I turned. The room was empty except for me and the patient. The 4-line shook slightly in my grip as the whisper came again, louder this time, right in my ear. "He's watching." I dropped the line and backed into the corner. The old man's eyelids fluttered. His mouth fell open. "He's here," he croaked, voice dry as parchment. Then his eyes snapped open wide, pupils blown, and he screamed. A horrible, shrill wail that cut off instantly as the monitor flatlined. The respirator kept hissing as if mocking me. I scrambled to his side, fumbling with CPR, but he was gone. The attending called it natural causes. They moved the body out within the hour, but I had to finish the 4 setup later for another patient in the same room. As I worked, the line jerked in my hand, and I heard the whisper once more, cold and final. "He's behind you." I refused to turn. I finished as quickly as I could and fled the room. Even now, I don't look over my shoulder when I'm there. I know exactly what I'd see. I volunteered in the neonatal ICU, drawn by the soft glow of the incubators and the promise of helping the smallest, most fragile lives. But one night, I noticed an empty crib rocking by itself in the far corner. The room was silent except for the steady beep of monitors, but the crib creaked in a slow, rhythmic motion. I approached cautiously, heart pounding, and felt a wave of icy air push past me. As I reached out to stop the rocking, I heard it, a faint, wet gurgle, like a baby crying underwater. My fingers brushed the railing and the sound stopped instantly. But when I peered inside, there was a dark, spreading stain on the white mattress. Red, fresh, impossible. I stumbled back, hand to my mouth. I turned to get help, but the room seemed to stretch, the incubators flickering in and out of sight. The crying started again, now a harsh, guttural wail that filled the space, echoing off tile and glass. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. It was inside my head. I caught sight of the crib again. It was empty, but the mattress sagged as if something heavy lay there, breathing. I bolted, nearly knocking over an 4-pole. When I returned with a colleague, the crib was perfectly still, mattress clean and dry. They laughed it off, but I never volunteered in that ward again. Sometimes, in the quiet of other wings, I hear that muffled crying, growing louder as if searching for someone willing to pick it up and hold it forever. I was covering a new shift in a part of the hospital I didn't know well. Old, half-renovated, with walls that didn't quite match and floors that creaked. Around midnight, I got turned around delivering meds. I turned a corner and found myself in a narrow hallway lined with doors I'd never seen before, unlit and cold as a freezer. Confused, I tried to backtrack, but the entrance behind me was gone. Just more corridor. My flashlight flickered and died. Panic rose in my throat. I heard footsteps, slow, measured, approaching from the far end. I held my breath, straining to hear. The steps stopped. I whispered hello, voice cracking. Silence. Then the handle of the nearest door rattled violently. I backed away, heart thudding. One by one, the other doors began to shake and bang, hinges shrieking in protest. The air turned foul, the stench of rotting meat filling my nose. I turned and ran, tripping over unseen debris, scraping my palms bloody. Behind me, the doors slammed open all at once, a deafening clap that seemed to pull the air from my lungs. I didn't look back. I ran until I crashed through an old double door and found myself in the main corridor of the hospital. Brightly lit, nurses chatting casually. No one believed me. That hallway doesn't exist on any blueprint. I still get lost sometimes, but I'll never go near that wing again, because I'm sure the next time those doors open for me, I won't make it back out. My hospital had an ancient service elevator they warned new staff not to use, always breaking down, erratic. One night I was rushing labs to the basement, and the regular elevator was out of order. Against my better judgment, I hit the call button on the old one. It opened with a groan, stale air rolling out, carrying the metallic scent of blood. I stepped in, pressed B. The doors shuttered shut. The light flickered overhead, then died completely. I stood in blackness so complete I felt like I was buried. The elevator began to move down, impossibly far. I felt the walls closing in, heard scratching sounds, soft at first, then desperate. A voice whispered in my ear, "We're almost there." Cold breath freezing my neck. I screamed, hammering the door button. The elevator stopped with a bone-jarring lurch. The doors scraped open onto a hallway I'd never seen. Bare concrete walls weeping dark stains. A smell like rotting meat thick in my nose. Shapes moved at the far end, shambling, twitching, wrong. They turned toward me in unison. No faces, just glistening muscle and empty eye sockets. I stabbed at the closed door button until it finally responded. The doors groaning shut just as something slammed against them from outside. The elevator shot back up and opened onto my floor. Bright lights, normal noises. My knees buckled. I stumbled out, labs forgotten. No one believed me when I tried to explain. Now, when I pass that service elevator, the doors sometimes open on their own. And inside, I hear someone whisper, "Ready for another ride?" I was pulling a double in the surgical ICU, too tired to think straight. The smell of antiseptic burned my nose, but couldn't cover the underlying sourness of illness and death. Around 3 a.m., I saw a nurse I didn't recognize walking into a patient's room. Long hair tucked under her cap, uniform white and old-fashioned. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming she was an agency hire. But as I passed the door, I saw her leaning over the patient, whispering in a hoarse voice that made the hair on my arms stand up. The patient, a man with pneumonia, was gasping desperately, eyes wide with terror. I heard him croak, "No, please," as the nurse stroked his face with gray, rotting fingers that left dark smears on his skin. I yanked open the door, but she was gone. No trace of her. The patient was coding. I called a code blue, but we couldn't save him. Later, I told the attending what I'd seen, expecting to be dismissed, but his face went pale. He asked if she was in an old white uniform. When I nodded, he swallowed hard. He told me she'd been seen before, decades ago, after dying of an infection she spread to her patients. No one wanted to believe in ghost stories on the record, but everyone knew about her. I quit that hospital soon after, but even in my new job, when I hear raspy whispers in a dark room or see an unfamiliar nurse in old-fashioned whites, I turn and leave. I don't want to see her face again. I was helping close down an old oncology wing they were about to demolish. All the patients had been moved, but it felt wrong to walk the halls, like the walls were remembering the suffering. Paint peeled like dead skin. The floor creaked in the cold. I was checking rooms when I heard weeping echo through the corridor, soft and wet. I called out, but it cut off instantly. Uneasy, I kept going. In room 27, I found a patient bed still there for some reason, sheets yellowed and stiff. On it sat a woman in a black veil, head bowed. I froze, feeling my hair prickle. Her shoulders shook as she sobbed. I whispered, asking if she needed help. She didn't look up, but the crying stopped. I heard her inhale sharply, wetly, like trying to hold in bile. Slowly she lifted her head, veil falling away to reveal a face eaten by tumors, eyes black and glistening. Her mouth opened far too wide, and she let out a wail that vibrated in my chest, rattling the ceiling tiles loose. I ran, slipping on cracked linoleum, heart screaming in my chest. The sound chased me through the halls, growing louder even though I knew she wasn't moving. When I burst outside into the biting wind, everything went silent. The next day, they sealed off that wing for demolition. I watched them tear it down, but sometimes at night, I still see her in my dreams, sitting calmly on that ancient bed, black veil covering her ruined face, waiting for someone new to wander in and ask if she's okay. I had the misfortune of working the overnight shift in the geriatric ward, a place where death was so common it felt like part of the staff. The air always smelled faintly of bleach and stale linens, and the old ceiling tiles were stained with ghostly watermarks. That night, I was updating charts at the nurse's station when I saw an alert on the monitor. A call light from room 12. I frowned. The man who'd been in that room, Mr. Davis, had passed away only an hour before. His body was still waiting for transport to the morgue. I told myself it was a glitch, but felt my stomach twist as I walked down the hall. The lights seemed dimmer than usual, buzzing softly. The door to room 12 was ajar, and a sliver of flickering fluorescent light spilled into the corridor like a crooked grin. Pushed it open slowly, heart racing. Inside, the room was cold enough that I could see my breath. Mr. Davis's sheet-covered body lay on the bed. Beside him sat a dark figure, back to me, shoulders hunched, head lowered. I blinked, unable to speak, watching as it slowly turned toward me. Its face was obscured by shadows, but its eyes gleamed wetly, fixed on mine. It raised one skeletal finger to its lips, as if urging me to keep quiet. Then it leaned over the body, whispering words too soft to hear. I heard Mr. Davis answer, no breath in his lungs, but answering anyway in a dry, rattling moan. I turned and fled, tripping over the threshold, scraping my palms raw. Later, they asked why I refused to go back in. I lied and said I was sick, but I heard them zip up the body bag later. It was wet with something dark, and the sheet was torn where his mouth should have been. During my residency, I was assigned the night shift in the emergency department. A parade of drunks, overdoses, accidents that left you numb. But one night, I noticed a patient chart on the counter, yellowed and frayed, with no name or ID number. I asked the charge nurse about it, but she just shrugged, saying she'd never seen it before. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it and read the first page. Scribbled vitals with impossible values. Heart rate 0, BP unmeasurable, temperature marked as cold. The diagnosis was simply expired. Confused, I flipped to the next page, and my blood ran cold. It listed my own name with today's date. Under status, it read, admitted, awaiting expiration. My hands shook as I closed it, a chill crawling over my scalp. I tried to throw it away, but it appeared back on the counter each time, always open to that page. My pulse thundered in my ears. When I finally asked the attending for help, he grabbed it, smirked, and tossed it into the shredder. I exhaled in relief, but hours later, as I sat at the station, I heard the shredder kick on by itself. When I turned, the chart was there, perfectly whole, balanced on top of the shredder bin. The attending was gone. No one saw him leave. I went to find him, but the trauma bay was dark and empty except for the faint smell of iron. That curse chart still shows up for me sometimes, even on days off. I won't open it anymore. I already know what it says, but I can't stop wondering if the expiration date is about to change. Thank you for listening to Grave Tongue. Sleep tight, if you can. Have a good night, and don't forget to check the shadows. Until next time, goodbye.